For decades, ArcGIS has been the center of the GIS world. It's a tool many of us learned on, built our first maps in, and used to build enterprise GIS systems. But as GIS evolves towards open, cloud-native, and AI-powered workflows, where does ArcGIS Pro fit in? It's still the most powerful desktop GIS platform in the world, but it's also trying to reinvent itself for the modern data era. So in this video, we'll break down what ArcGIS is, why it matters when it shines, and when you might want to look at alternatives as well. I wanted to share a little bit of background on this video as well. If you've watched my channel, you know I talk a lot about modern GIS, and I haven't talked much about Esri. And the reason for that is since I left school in 2010, and I'm aging myself a little bit here, I haven't used Esri's products in production workflows. I've used them to check out what they're doing, understand a little bit about how their ecosystem works, and used it in that capacity to kind of keep up on what they're doing. But in production workflows, I personally have not used it. So with that being said, I do understand a lot of their ecosystem and all these different things, but I just want to give that caveat that a lot of this information is based on my understanding of interacting with it as a tool and taking some time to understand what they've been building over time. So with that said, let's jump in and talk a little bit about what ArcGIS is. ArcGIS Pro is really Esri's flagship desktop GIS application as part of their wider ArcGIS ecosystem. There are different products like ArcMap and all the way back to ArcInfo that ArcGIS is kind of the grandchild of those early systems. So it's developed over time and is a powerful desktop application. It fits into the broader ArcGIS system, things like ArcGIS Enterprise, ArcGIS Online, and ArcPy. So it has all these integrations, but really we're going to focus in on ArcGIS Pro as a desktop system and try to isolate that, at least in this video. Now it's the successor, like I mentioned, to ArcMap. So it's built with a core architecture to work on desktop systems and a modern interface. It kind of feels like a Microsoft product, but for mapping and visualization and processing of spatial data. Now, again, it provides deep tools for lots of different core GIS workflows, things like data editing, manipulating geometries, storing and creating all these different data processes within your system. It has lots of different tools for analysis and geoprocessing. It has tools for 3D visualization and different tools for cartography, creating maps, both static maps and interactive, as well as integrating into geodatabases and different systems. And again, it pairs really tightly with ArcGIS Online and ArcGIS Enterprise. Now, when you think of it in this context where you have maps that are published online and your enterprise data store, the ArcGIS Pro is really the console you'll be interacting with on your computer, right? It's the thing that you'll be pulling in data from or publishing maps to if it's for ArcGIS Online. And it can do all these things. It'd be really hard to break down all the different things it can do. But if you think of anything in GIS that you want to work with, you have all these different data types. You need to manipulate your data, you need to do some analysis, you need to store your layers, you need to create advanced visualization, maybe you want to bring in 3D. All of these different things can be done in ArcGIS Pro. It's your center console for managing all of that. Again, many of the operations are done directly on the application itself. That application runs on your computer. And just like QGIS or other systems, it's limited or constrained based on the amount of computing power your computer has. So if you try to do too much in it, it could potentially fail. Now, again, it has that coupling to external services. So if you do need to offload a process, you may be able to do that within the Esri ecosystem. But again, we're talking about that as a constraint system. That's something to keep in mind as we talk about it. But it has so many optimizations built in. It's very fast for a lot of these different things. So it is a very powerful desktop application for all aspects of the GIS workflow. So why should you care about ArcGIS Pro? Well, it's a comprehensive toolkit, right? I said it has so many different things in it, from advanced spatial analysis, 3D tools, network analysis, geoprocessing, has all the pieces that you would want out of a desktop, GIS system. It's built and designed for enterprise integration, right? It's designed for organizations that maintain large geodatabases. They have different services that they need to publish, and they have many different users, right? So it allows you to have an interoperable system that's backed up by a large company with the support behind it that you would expect from some service like that. So this enterprise integration is really one of the most important things that's designed behind it, right? If you're using an open source version like QGIS, you don't get that backing of the company. You might have to go find someone to do that or just do it yourself. So that's something to consider here, is the enterprise coupling that comes along with that. Now, increasingly, it has become interoperable to a certain degree, right? It supports many open formats in addition to all the, proprietary formats, different things like if you're creating a map, there's the .lyr files, there's all these different, kind of proprietary types that really just work well within the Esri ecosystem, but also supports many open formats. Like you can bring in GeoJSONs and CSVs and GeoTIFFs. You can connect to databases like PostGIS. They recently added support for DuckDB. I know they're adding support for things like cloud-optimized GeoTIFFs, spatiotemporal asset catalogs, as well as, GeoParquet. So they're adding some of these interoperable pieces. But sometimes when you're building some of the projects, you may have to save and store those in a format that's really, focused in on Esri, right? And because I listed those different ones that you can look at here. So that's something to be aware of that will support interoperability up to a certain degree. And then it's really focused on having that tight enterprise integration because, well, basically to provide that level of support, they want to know they have the systems built in to do that. They can't cover possibly everything under the sun. So they want to have some of those enterprise integrations that they can provide really powerful and good service to. Now, there is some built-in automation as well. Model Builder is the most, visual way to do that. You can build, models for different analysis or processing steps or anything you want to kind of automate. It has some of that automation built in. It's commonly coupled with FME, which is a different tool I might cover in a future video that does similar type of things, but, has some interoperability to different data sets and things like that. So Model Builder is really focused in on what you can do within ArcGIS. If you need to go outside of that, things like FME are there as well, or you can integrate with Python with ArcPy, and you can kind of make these reproducible workflows easier. QGIS has very similar things. They have a Model Builder type of interface where you can build these visual models, and you can do Python scripting with QGIS or integrate other Python libraries as well. So it's very similar from that perspective to QGIS. And what it's really made for, if you're coming from some of the legacy tools, originally it was like ArcInfo, or even things like ArcMap or shapefile-based workflows, Pro is like the modern Esri gateway to do that. That's what they're trying to have, and it is really that like desktop system that connects to all these other systems that has a lot of toolkits built into it, but then can connect out into other systems. So it's really a solid way to do all those different things. So in this next section, I talk about if you actually need to use ArcGIS Pro, and I rank this on 4 different categories: personal projects, one-off projects, small teams, and enterprises. Now, again, in terms of pure functionality, for personal projects and one-off projects, it's very great. If you can, basically build, analytical workflows, cartographic workflows, spatial analysis, you can do some modeling, you can bring in lots of different data, all the stuff I talked about you can do. So if you need to do all of that, that's really, great for all these kind of very personal projects or one-off projects. The question really comes down to access, right? If you have access either through your work or for school, lots of educational departments have access, so you can actually get access through your school, or your work is paying for it, that's great. But if you have to pay for it on your own, there is a licensing cost that you have to be aware of. So that is something that's kind of like the bigger barrier to entry here. But let's assume that cost is not a part of this, and you do have access to ArcGIS Pro. It's really great to, bring that in and build it. And you can do a lot of these things just in Pro without the sort of enterprise support around it. You don't need all those different things. And for a certain scale, you can build that out yourself. But again, QGIS can do a lot of these things as well. So if cost is an issue, then QGIS becomes a very easy way to go ahead and get started, both for personal projects and one-off projects. But if you have access, let's say for personal projects, it's about a 4, and for one-off projects, again, probably about a 4 as well. It gives you a very easy way to do that. Now, sometimes there might be a little bit of an overhead if you need to like start up, or you want to, over-engineer things. If you can do some of this through code, that might be the easier way for one-off projects. So that's just something to balance in terms of how much you want to commit it into that ecosystem for, maybe you just want to get a job done and get something done. That's something to consider as well. Now, for small teams, it works really well if everyone's in the Esri ecosystem, right? If everyone's on ArcGIS, you have people that are using ArcGIS Pro across your organization. They're connecting and building maps in ArcGIS Online. They're connecting into data on, ArcGIS Enterprise. Maybe you're building applications. It works really well because if everyone's kind of on the same system and you speaking the same language there, it's a really valuable system to do all of that. So for small teams, it works great. Again, probably about a 4 or 4.5 here, because if everyone's on that same system, that's great. If you have other data systems that you need to work alongside, though, that's where things start to become difficult, right? So if you consider you're a small team, but you need to share data out to, maybe someone with a PostGIS database, or maybe they're working in an analytics database like a BigQuery or a Snowflake. Maybe they're doing processing with Apache Sedona or Spark. When you have that interoperability, it can kind of become limiting because your data is built into that system. It's made to work inside that exact structure. Now, there are tools to kind of take data out, and it's not to say that you can't move that data around, but there's simpler ways to do it if you kind of work inside an ecosystem that's purpose-built for that, like a modern geospatial stack. So again, when I'm talking about small teams, if it's just your team and you don't have to worry about the outside world of GIS, give it a 4.5. If you do have to worry about that interoperability, then you start to have some of those points knocked off because you have to consider, how do I connect all these different things together? I mentioned, like I said, there are tools to do this, but you want it to be seamless and you want to reduce the cost and the effort and the energy. Depending on how often you have to do that, that's where you consider, okay, is it something I can patch in? Can I use like an FME to do data transfer? Or should I just kind of build a system that sits right along that that my team has been kind of building from that perspective? Now, for the enterprise, for large organization, this problem that I mentioned earlier kind of just gets more amplified, right? If you have everyone working on ArcGIS Pro, that's great, and they're all connecting to the same ecosystem, that's really good too. But again, if you have to integrate into these different analytics systems, into different data systems, if you need to push things into these other places, that's where it can get a little bit tricky. But sometimes that's actually an advantage. Enterprises like the support that comes along with a large company that provides that. It allows you to have different integrations. There's tools that integrate for ArcGIS for, I believe it's Power BI. There's, different integrations there. And again, I mentioned some of the interoperable, tools like with PostGIS and other systems. It's really about how far down the rabbit hole you want to go into one system versus the other. And once you get at this level, that's really what you're getting. I know I'm talking just about, ArcGIS Pro here as kind of that central hub, but you can't ignore the pieces that are behind it and how it connects into those systems. So something to consider here for enterprises, if you're really committed to that ecosystem and want all the bells and whistles and support that goes along with it, it's a great system, and to choose that, again, about a 4.5. But if you want to kind of get closer to like what the rest of the data stack is doing, you should really consider what's happening over there and say, okay, how could I build that? And maybe use ArcGIS Pro as a gateway to go into those different systems and maybe something to access and interop with that data and stuff like that. But again, ArcGIS Pro is starting to open the doors and be more connected into modern data stacks. We'll see how that evolves over time. But at this level, again, it's just as a standalone GIS tool and integrating into some of these data systems, there's places where it's really good, and there's places where you might want to consider how to do that in different places. So again, it's really about weighing these different options. It's much more of an architectural discussion at these levels for small teams and enterprises. So again, for enterprises, if you want to stick in that ecosystem, it's about a 4.5. If you have trouble, it might go down a couple points there as well. And it's just one of those things that you have to consider and think as an architect more than just someone using a GIS system here. So how do you actually use it? Well, you have to get a license to go access that. You can go to Esri's website and actually purchase a license to actually go and grab that version. You download that. It only works on Windows systems, so sorry Mac users that you can't use it. You can use it for a virtual machine if you want to do it that way, but you have to have a Windows machine to run ArcGIS Pro. And how it stores it, you basically start to add data to your map. It adds it as a project file. I think it's like an APRX file that stores a ArcGIS Pro project that allows you to organize your maps, your layers, your models, and things like that. And then you can connect into different files. If there's shape files or things like that, you can connect into file geodatabases, which are basically like organized files anyways themselves, which is like kind of their own system. But a geodatabase is basically multiple layers or files there. You can connect into enterprise geodatabases or external sources, things like PostGIS or even S3. I believe there's some interoperability there. So once you download that, basically you start to add your data to the map, right? You show that, you create layers, you modify the projections, you do all the things that you do there. And then you can do what you need to do. Maybe it's cartographic design that you want to do. Maybe it's, building some spatial analysis. There's there's a processing toolbox that allows you to do that. You can do automation if you want want to do Model Builder or ArcPy. But then once your data is in there, you can kind of start playing around with all the different tools. And basically, the way you use it is you point around and click and find the different tools you use. You can kind of do that as one-off repetitive workflows, and then you save that, and you basically are able to publish that file or that project file. That project file can be shared with others as long as they have access to the same data or the geodatabase or the files that are underneath the hood. Or you can publish that to ArcGIS Online if you have access to that, or your data layers into ArcGIS Enterprise portals. But basically, it works just like QGIS. You bring data in, you can run the different steps, you can do the things that you want to do and push those out there. The next section, I want to cover pitfalls and some things to potentially watch out for. Now, the biggest one, of course, is cost and licensing. This ArcGIS Pro requires a paid license, right? You need to pay to actually get access to it. And sometimes there are also paid extensions that come with that. Again, if your organization pays for this and it's already there, you're already set and you're ready to go. Sometimes you need extensions. I think some of them are like spatial analyst or network analyst or things like that. And you may actually need like ArcGIS Online credits to do different things like geocoding and stuff like that. So there are like extra services like add-ons here. It works just like any other software service. So it's nothing like, crazy or anything like that. You just have to be aware of how many credits you're consuming and how many you need to get and all that different stuff. So that's one thing that you need to be aware of in this system, is that you have to pay for the license and then you may have to pay for other services as well. Again, it's also a closed ecosystem, right? It's Esri's proprietary ecosystem. Again, if you have the licenses, you're already set to go, but it's not fully open. There's like starting to get some integrations with cloud native formats, GeoParquet, cloud optimized geotips. They exist. I've seen some integrations with things like DuckDB. And so like bit by bit, Pro is kind of like buying into this, like kind of ecosystem view that's not just the existing Esri ecosystem, but it works perfectly in that ecosystem. So there's some different things there that you can do, but increasingly it's starting to open up, but still it works best in that Esri ecosystem that it's built on. Now, performance on big data is another issue. This is the same issue in QGIS, so it's nothing there. It can handle large data sets better than like ArcMap did, but desktop bound, it works based on the constraints of your machine and your computer. It can't like massively process things in parallel for anything like that. And for massive data sets, you might need like, there's other Esri extensions, like things like ArcGIS GeoAnalytics or Esri notebooks and Python things. So there's all these, like, Esri has a ton of products. It was like over 140 last time I looked. So there's all these things you can get to go along with it to solve these different problems. But again, for QGIS, it's like bound on big data, right? It's you can use the resources of your computer. So that's something to be aware of. So, but if your data's at scale and small enough, it will certainly work. Otherwise, you might be seeing this error, which means you probably pushed it a little further than you probably were able to based on your computer constraints. So there's also some considerations around Python lock-in. QGIS has like an open, QGIS Python library, and you can actually install other Python libraries there. But ArcGIS uses ArcPy. It's very powerful, but it's again tied to Esri's environment and versioning. It's a little bit less portable than open libraries like GeoPandas or Shapely. So that's something to consider if you're looking with Python. And again, there's limited cloud native support. It's not designed specifically to work with like S3 or ZAR or Parquet. It really relies on Esri's own data formats and services. Like I mentioned, these are file systems that really just work within the Esri ecosystem. And again, if you've committed to this ecosystem and it works, that's totally fine. That works well for you. But if you want to kind of build some of these interoperable open systems, there's extra work to get there. So when not to use it, when you need, like right now, cloud native support, you want to build open source workflows, you want to integrate into, data systems or a data stack that's, maybe outside of Esri that your organization is talking about. You're maybe using, data warehouses, maybe you're using processing systems like Spark, maybe, you have data teams that are using Iceberg, they're using Python workflows, all these different things. That's what you want to consider. Maybe you want to have an open workflow. Maybe you can still use ArcGIS Pro for that one desktop piece, but you want to connect into those systems. That can be a little bit harder. So you can consider things like QGIS, GeoPandas, Sedona DB. There's lots of systems to kind of do different pieces. Again, you're more on your own because you don't have the backing of a very large organization to provide that support, but that's something to consider there. Now, for modern data pipelines, if you need to build and do like, ETL, large-scale data processing, analytics engineering, stuff like that, there's lots of different systems there. And, even things, just like adding a database like PostGIS, if you're doing, distributed processing like Apache Sedona and Whereabouts, if you're using, like local analytics using DuckDB, even tools like FME, it's another proprietary system, but you can build and pick pieces here to batch onto that and start to scale. So for modern data pipelines, it can make it a little bit more difficult. If you're doing collaboration, this is one area that really focus in on. If you have and you're collaborating with other people in the Esri ecosystem, they can probably consume a lot of the same stuff you can. Maybe if you're publishing data layers, that's another thing that it's very easy to say like, oh, I have this data layer that I published. A lot of open data portals and cities do this, where they have like published data layers, and different systems can actually get access to that. So once again, if you're in the Esri kind of system, it works great. But if you need to do open, collaborative, code-based projects, some of that open data and sharing and things like that, open tools, notebooks, and code are generally more flexible and more interoperable, as well as the open data formats. And again, for budget-conscious teams or learners, right? If you're learning and you don't have the money to commit to a full license, QGIS provides much of the same functionality. Very, very close in terms of functionality parity and things like that. There's an article here where it kind of compares them. You can see for most things they're very, right next to each other in terms of their functionality. And then, like your Python, your SQL ecosystem allow you to do those things that are, completely free and cost effective. So where can you learn more? There is a ton of documentation on ArcGIS Pro. There's obviously the official documentation. Esri provides a lot of courses. If you've gone through a GIS system, at college or university level, you've probably learned on ArcGIS. That's how I learned, using ArcGIS first, and a long time ago, again, to date myself. And there's lots of different training materials that Esri publishes, both free as well as paid trainings. You can also check out YouTube. They publish lots of different information from Esri events. John Nelson is a really great person to follow, both on social media and YouTube. He publishes these really amazing cartography tutorials, so check him out. I love watching and seeing the stuff that he comes up with. There's the Esri developer channel, so basically there's lots of ways to get access to that. I also recommend checking out ArcGIS. It's the Reddit GIS board. There's lots of different questions people post on different things about ArcGIS and Esri and ways to get things done. So it's a great place to see how people are doing this in very real forms and maybe integrating with other systems and stuff like that. But there's no shortage of places to learn about ArcGIS Pro. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this video. Like I said, I am not a day-to-day Esri user, but I've used it, I understand it. It's something that just exists in our world, and I know lots of other people use it. So I kind of wanted to put a video just to kind of share my experience and how I see it fitting into this bigger ecosystem and some of the things that are happening on the modern geospatial data stack side. I think Esri has made some really nice steps to go forward to integrate into modern tools. They're making this effort to start to get out there. But again, where a lot of the functionality is dependent on that broader Esri ecosystem. But again, for different things, you can use ArcGIS Pro standalone. And if you have access to it, it's great to get going from there. But I'd love to hear maybe about how you're using Esri, ArcGIS Pro. How are you using it in your workflows? What's worked? How have you used it in different systems? And how have you connected into different things? So I'd love to hear more about that. You can share any of those thoughts in the comments below, and I will see you in the next video.